Ambassador, it's great to see you today.
Thank you, Jason, for the chance to talk to your viewers.
So, Mr. Ambassador, you worked in the first Trump administration as the ambassador to the OSCE. Former to that, you'd been the governor of the state of Virginia, head of the Republican Party, and you were in the U.S. military. You've had a full career. But recently, the Republicans, with whom you've spent decades of your life, have come out in positions that many would argue are simply anti Ukrainian or even pro Russian. What do you make of the current situation?
First of all, I think it would be wrong to characterize the entire Republican Party as having any particular point of view right now. There is certainly a very strong faction in the Republican Party that is tending to be more isolationist, and there are strong voices right now out there that are advocating that view. But there are many, many other Republicans that don't share that view and are much more internationalist because we understand in the global conflict that we just simply have to have allies and we have to be willing to live in the world as it really exists today with modern communication, modern travel, modern interaction. And we understand all this. This doesn't mean, by the way, Jason, that people like me believe that you make American interests secondary. I don't believe that. I believe this America first is it is correct to do things for the American people, just as in my experience, British government does things for British people, German government does things for German people. But there's a twist to this, and that is you can do all these things better if you're in partnership with people that share your views and your principles and your ultimate goals. And that, I believe, is a place where a minority of the Republican Party has begun to go off the rails.
So, how did that happen? How did this isolationism creep into the modern Republican Party? It was only a generation ago that Ronald Reagan, the godfather of modern conservatism, was leading the charge globally for the United States to support democracy, freedom, and human rights, and most especially in Eastern Europe, as he did his best to defeat the Soviet Union. Yet today, we see some who are totally indifferent or even perhaps sympathetic to Russia. But where did this change come about? Where did it come about that so many people believed that the US's role was oversized or unnecessary or simply not beneficial to the United States? And today we see that reflected in the isolationism in the Republican Party.
I think there's a message out there that Americans are being taken advantage of, that they're being uh, put into a detrimental position by being people that understand the international implications of the world. And I believe that's not true. I affirmatively believe it's not true, but it's going to have some appeal. There are people have always been Americans that don't think we should be engaged in foreign wars. George Washington said the very same thing the first day that the first time he was leaving the presidency. But the world is different now. It's and the adversaries are different, and they can't be ignored. And that's why I believe that Republican foreign policy is going to continue to evolve in a positive way.
So, looking ahead, though, how do you think our European partners should be reacting to this? You spent a lot of time at the OSCE, so you've specifically looked at European security issues. Do you think that there might be a paradigm shift where they no longer view the US as a reliable partner?
Oh, yes, I think that could happen. But at the end of the day, neither I nor anybody else ought to underestimate the power of the United States of America. When I was ambassador, even though there were difference of opinions on any particular topic at any time, the United States was always treated with great respect. And of course, I followed a policy of trying to engage in our strongest allies and new allies, particularly in Eastern Europe, trying to encourage them to continue to shift to the West and to be strong members of the West. And in fact, that policy, not just by me, but by many people, is what has encouraged Ukraine to want to move to the West. And that is, by the way, the source of this war. Putin just simply cannot tolerate a Slavic people right next door to him moving to the West. My ultimate belief is that not only does Ukraine move to the West and are fighting a war to achieve that, but ultimately I think the Russians are going to move to the West. This is an anomaly, I think, with this former KGB agent being in charge of a tyranny in Russia. Russian tyranny has long roots, to be sure. But in the end, I think that the modernity is going to catch up with this. And I'm optimistic even about Russia in the very long run.
It's surprising to hear you have optimism, but that's good to hear. When you had to work with the Russians, though, at the OSCE, for instance, what was that like? How were their positions?
It was actually just very classic. I was looking after America's interests, including our allies. They were looking after Russia's interest. There wasn't anything very exotic about that. And you in the diplomatic world in Vienna, the Russian ambassador and I got along quite well. But we all understood who we were, each other were. Everybody understood I was representing America and he was representing Russia. And there wasn't any shameful thing about that or any reason to be reluctant about that. That's what you do. And by the way, if you take that position and raise it up to America first, there's nothing inconsistent with that. It's just a different of approach. You can either go home as an isolationist and let the world eventually creep to your doorstep, or you can continue to be engaged in the world. Jason, there's one more point I want to make to you, and I've made this too. America's a little different. America has a duality in the way that it approaches the world and approaches itself. And that duality is that you want to look after your country in the very Kissinger realist type of approach that America first and American interests and what hard power does for the United States and its population. But there's a duality, and that is that we Americans believe in ourselves because of our values. We believe in democracy. We believe in human rights. We believe in what is right and wrong. And we are not willing to put aside uh, things all the time just for our own self-interest. Americans have a duality that we have to satisfy, or we're not Americans. And that's often noticed. People are often told to choose one or the other, self-interest or idealism. My view is they can coexist side by side, and Americans are not really Americans unless they do exist side by side.
That's a great argument. But there are signs that perhaps things have changed. Trump, aside from closing down USAID, a clear sign that the US was not interested in helping other countries abroad, also chose to close down organizations that were founded by Ronald Reagan and chartered by the US Congress specifically to promote democracy abroad. Those organizations, such as the National Endowment for Democracy, the National Democratic Institute, and the National Republican Institute, worked specifically to promote democracy in countries such as Russia and help oppose the authoritarian regime there. My own work with the IRI led to my expulsion from Russia for life due to the fact that it's considered to be a national security threat. But it seems we've done the opposite. We've taken away what Russia considered to be a threat, and we've just neutralized it. We've just decided that we're going to get off the game board. And I think that's probably a good sign that the US is becoming more isolationist. Do you think that's the direction the United States is going now, or just the Republicans? Or what should we expect next?
No, I think that there's still plenty of time for conservatism to continue to go to work with its original roots and to understand that an isolationism that we've seen in the American past does not work, except that now in the modern age it really doesn't work because this is a very different world that we're living in. It's much more connected. The internet is much more connected with people, and I think that a self-interested internationalism that also expresses Americans' values and idealism is perfectly achievable, and I think that it will continue to be achieved.
So, what would that vision look like? Tell me, if you were heading the Republican Party or sitting in the White House right now as the president, what sort of foreign policy would the US have?
I think I would recognize the success that we have had, particularly with Ronald Reagan's approach of actually winning the Cold War. And I think I understand exactly how that came about because I understand the roots of the OSCE, where I was ambassador. I understand those roots and how the victory occurred. And the victory really occurred through soft power, not hard power. The West never invaded the Soviet Empire, never invaded the captive nations, never won a nuclear war with Russia or any kind of war with Russia. What happened was that the values of the Western world prevailed and actually persuaded a leader, a millennial leader, really like Gorbachev, that the best interests of the Russian people were in the advancement of the Russian people and their freedoms and their well-being. And so he actually began to give up this idea of conquest as being the definition of Russian greatness. But when I was there, my goal was to reassure our allies that we were all on the same team, to take the Eastern European countries and continue to move them in confidence to the West, uh, to uh, to talk to the Russian people if possible. Everything that I did was translated into Russian and put on the internet. maybe they could never see it because of the way that the authoritarians are trying to block the internet. But the Russians are smart people, and I suspect that many of them did see the statements I was making in Vienna. These were the principles that were involved there. And I think that, frankly, the policy was being well followed. I'm not sure that the Trump administration cared a lot about what I was doing, but I was in line with the State Department, which was headed up by a Trump appointee, of course, the Secretary of State. Nobody ever pushed back on me and told me I was supposed to abandon anybody, or especially to abandon American leadership. I never was expected to do that, and I never did.
So, since you had that insider view, I'm sure many people would be curious to know, did you ever get a sense, though, that the White House in the first Trump administration was somehow sympathetic to Russia or was simply disinterested in the security of Europe?
No, I didn't. I thought that the policy that the president was following was an America First type of approach. We saw that with a Pompeo speech in Europe. We saw that with the continuous engagement of President Trump in international meetings and organizations, that there was a sense of resentment that somehow America was not being appreciated for the role that it was playing and was somehow being taken advantage of. And look, I wouldn't rule any of this out. When you come to the point of the duty of our European allies to step up to the plate and become more militarily prepared and to increase their capacity, it's perfectly clear that they didn't do it. They just thought that once the Soviet Empire fell, that everything was secure and they could merrily go about the business of building their big welfare states. And now, of course, the Russian bear is back and now they're unprepared. That is not an American fault. That is their fault. And President Trump is right to point that out. And he's right to insist that they do more as our allies. They have that obligation to do that. Where I think I may disagree is that we do have an American interest in the success of our Western allies in Europe. We have a stake in that, and I think that needs to be understood also. This is a complicated business that we're in the modern world.
It certainly is. So, let me ask you just one last question. Looking ahead, what should we be paying attention to? What signs from Washington might we see that will indicate what's coming next for Ukraine or for U.S. relations with Russia? And what are you expecting?
Well, I think we need to be watching this negotiation very carefully, and I have certain ideas that if I were advising the president, and I'm not one of his advisors, but if I was, I think I would come back to the fundamental principles, and that would be that Russia must not be allowed to conquer another country. Once again, the Russian approach is that Ukraine is not another country, that they are a province of Russia, and it's just and proper for them to be returned to that status. But I know after the dissolution of the Soviet Empire that all these countries became independent countries and they want to be independent countries. I've visited Ukraine. I've seen what their approach is, and it's even stronger now that they've been invaded like this. But if Ukraine is not independent, neither are Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, or Moldova. In fact, if you really want to talk about the impression of Russian power on Europe, then all the Eastern European countries used to be in the Russian Empire. And if the vision that Putin has is to return to that, then the principles I would say to the president is, I've been there. I was a soldier much earlier than that in West Germany, and I know what this world can be like. And that's the one that Putin intends to create. I would not allow that to happen. I don't think that's in the American interest for that evil empire, if you will, to reemerge. And I think it's in opposition to the historical patterns that are moving in our favor. I think Putin can't succeed in doing this if we do the right things now. So I would urge the president to keep the fundamental principles in mind, and that means no conquest, no granting of legitimacy to Putin and his conquests. That can't be permitted to happen. And I believe that as long as the Ukrainians are properly supported, they will ultimately succeed because they're fighting for their lives as well as their sovereignty.
Absolutely. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Jason.